They thought she was weak. They thought she was just a housewife who got lucky. When Mark Vance handed his wife the pen to sign the divorce papers, he was smiling. He thought he was stripping her of everything: her home, her status, her future. He thought he had won. Elena Vance didn't scream. She didn't fight for the money. She just signed her name, picked up her purse, and walked out into the rain. Mark laughed as the door closed, but he stopped laughing 5 minutes later, because when Elena stepped onto the curb, she didn't call a cab. A custom Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up, and the man inside wasn't a stranger. He was the one man Mark Vance feared. This is the story of the woman who didn't get mad. She got even. The air in the conference room of Henderson Crick & Associates smelled of lemon polish and stale ambition. It was a cold, sterile space on the 42nd floor, overlooking the gray sprawl of Seattle. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling glass, distorting the city below into a watercolor blur of steel and misery. Eleanor Vance sat on one side of the massive mahogany table. She was 34, though the fluorescent lights made her look older today. She wore a simple beige trench coat over a white blouse, clothes that Mark had once called mousy. Her hands were folded in her lap, perfectly still. She wasn't looking at the view. She was looking at the fountain pen resting on the document in front of her. On the other side of the table sat Mark Vance. At 38, Mark was the picture of aggressive success. His suit was bespoke Italian silk, straining slightly at the shoulders from his gym routine. He checked his Rolex every 30 seconds, a nervous tic he had developed when his logistics software company Vanlog went public 3 years ago. "Let's get this over with, Elena," Mark said, his voice booming unnecessarily in the quiet room. He leaned back, spreading his arms across the leather chairs as if he owned the law firm, the building, and the air inside it. "I have a flight to Tokyo at 6. Unlike some people, I have an empire to run." Mr. Henderson, Mark's shark of a lawyer, pushed his glasses up his nose. He looked at Elena with a mixture of pity and professional disdain. "Mrs. Vance, as outlined in the settlement, you are waiving your right to spousal support in exchange for a lump sum of $50,000 and the retention of personal effects. You are also relinquishing all claims to Vanlog shares and the marital residence in Medina. Do you understand the finality of this?" Elena looked up. Her eyes were dark, unreadable. For 10 years, she had been the invisible woman, the wife who stayed home while Mark built the company, the wife who poured coffee while Mark entertained investors, the wife who was too boring for the gala dinners. "I understand," Eleanor said softly. Her voice was steady, lacking the tremor Henderson usually heard in these meetings. Mark snorted, shaking his head. "Jesus, Henderson, she understands. She just wants out. She knows she can't compete in my world anymore. Isn't that right, Elle?" He leaned forward, his predator's grin widening. "You know, I actually feel bad for you. 50 grand won't last long in this city. But hey, maybe you can go back to, what was it you did before we met? Tutoring math? Maybe you can find a nice little apartment in the suburbs. Get a cat." Eleanor didn't flinch. She picked up the pen. The weight of it felt good in her hand. Heavy. Final. She remembered the nights in their first cramped apartment, the humming of the servers she had built from scrap parts because they couldn't afford AWS. She remembered Mark sleeping on the couch while she debugged the routing algorithms that would eventually make Vanlog a billion-dollar unicorn. She remembered the day he told her to stop coming to the office because investors want to see a strong male lead, not a husband and wife hobby shop. She had stepped back. She had made herself small so he could feel big. "Are we done talking, Mark?" she asked. Mark blinked, surprised by the coolness of her tone. "Just sign the damn papers, Elena." She lowered the pen. The nib scratched against the paper. Elena Marie Vance. She signed the divorce decree. She signed the non-disclosure agreement. She signed the waiver of assets. With every signature, she felt a physical weight lifting off her chest, a chain breaking link by link. She capped the pen and pushed the stack of papers toward Henderson. "There," she said. "Excellent," Henderson said, gathering the documents quickly, as if afraid she might change her mind. "The check for the $50,000 will be wired to your account within 48 hours. Mark stood up, buttoning his jacket. He walked around the table and stood over her, invading her personal space one last time. He smelled of expensive musk and arrogance. "No hard feelings, babe," Mark said, his voice dropping to a mock sympathetic whisper. "You were a great starter wife, but we both know I outgrew you. Isabel, well, she understands the demands of a man in my position. She has vision. Isabel, the 24-year-old marketing intern, the cliché." Elena finally looked him in the eye. For a second, Mark faltered. He expected tears. He expected anger. He expected begging. Instead, he saw a void, a calm, terrifying indifference. "Goodbye, Mark," she said. "I hope the Tokyo deal goes exactly as you deserve." Mark laughed, clapping Henderson on the shoulder. "Oh, it will. It's going to triple our valuation. Enjoy the suburbs, Elena." He grabbed his briefcase and stormed out of the room, already barking orders into his phone. He didn't look back. He never did. Eleanor stood up slowly. She smoothed the front of her trench coat. She picked up her purse, a worn leather tote that had seen better days. "Mrs. Vance," Henderson said, pausing at the door, "do you need us to call you a cab? It's pouring out there." Eleanor walked to the door. She paused, her hand on the brass handle. "It's Miss Rostova now," she corrected him quietly. "And no, thank you. My ride is here." The elevator ride down 42 floors felt like a decompression chamber. Elena watched the numbers tick down. 30, 20, 10. With every floor, the persona of Elena Vance, the quiet housewife, disintegrated a little more. When the doors chimed open in the marble lobby, the first thing she saw was Isabel. The girl was sitting on a plush velvet sofa near the entrance, scrolling through her phone. She was undeniably beautiful, legs for days, blonde hair blown out to perfection, wearing a dress that cost more than the check Elena had just been promised. When she saw Elena, she didn't look ashamed. She smirked. Isabel stood up, checking her reflection in the glass wall. "Oh, hey," she said, her voice high and airy. "Mark said you guys were wrapping up. Is he coming down?" Elena stopped. She looked at the girl who had spent the last 6 months sleeping in her bed. Eleanor felt a strange pang of pity. Isabel had no idea she was just the next acquisition, a trophy to be displayed until the shine wore off. "He's on his way," Eleanor said calmly. "He's in a good mood. He thinks he won." Isabel frowned, confused by the phrasing. "Thinks. He likes his coffee with 3 sugars, but he'll tell you he drinks it black," Elena said, walking past her. "And he hates it when you touch his phone. Good luck, Isabel." She didn't wait for a response. She pushed through the heavy revolving doors and stepped out into the chaotic symphony of downtown Seattle. The noise hit her first. Horns honking, tires hissing on wet pavement, the dull roar of the city. The rain was coming down in sheets, cold and relentless. People were rushing past with umbrellas, heads down, fighting the wind. Elena didn't open an umbrella. She stood under the awning of the skyscraper, taking a deep breath of the damp, petrol-scented air. It tasted like freedom. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a burner phone. It was an old model, distinct from the sleek smartphone Mark monitored. She pressed a single speed dial number. "I'm out," she said into the receiver. "It's done." "Did he sign the waiver regarding the legacy code?" a deep voice asked on the other end. "He didn't even read it," Elena replied, a ghost of a smile touching her lips for the first time in years. "He was too busy gloating about the house. He relinquished all rights to obsolete intellectual property developed prior to 2019 in exchange for keeping the yacht." The voice on the other end let out a low, dark chuckle. "The fool! He just traded the engine for the paint job. I'm 30 seconds away." Eleanor hung up and dropped the phone into a trash can. She stepped out from under the awning, letting the rain hit her face. It washed away the hairspray, the foundation, the mask she had worn for Mark. Behind her, the revolving doors spun again. Mark burst out, Isabel trailing behind him under a massive umbrella held by a doorman. "Elena!" Mark shouted, spotting her standing by the curb. He looked almost comical, trying to shout over the traffic while protecting his Italian loafers from a puddle. "What are you doing? Standing there soaking wet? Have some dignity, for God's sake." He turned to Isabel, gesturing at Elena like she was a stray dog. "Look at her. This is what happens when you don't have ambition. Sad, really." "Do you want money for a bus?" Mark yelled, reaching for his wallet, performing generosity for his audience. "Here, take a 20. Get yourself a hot chocolate." He pulled out a bill, waving it in the air. The doorman looked away, embarrassed. Isabel giggled nervously. Elena didn't move. She was looking down the street. Through the grey curtain of rain, a set of headlights cut through the gloom. They weren't the yellow halogen of a taxi or the standard LED of a Uber. They were crisp, diamond-white xenon beams. A vehicle glided through the traffic like a shark parting a school of fish. It was long, obsidian black, and imposing. A Rolls-Royce Phantom extended wheelbase. The Spirit of Ecstasy hood ornament gleamed silver against the storm. The car slowed to a crawl and pulled up precisely at the curb in front of Eleanor, splashing dirty water onto Mark's pristine trousers. "Hey!" Mark shouted, jumping back. "Watch where you're going, idiot!" The rear door of the Rolls-Royce didn't just open. It swung outward with a hydraulic hiss, operated by a driver who had exited the vehicle in a fluid motion before Mark could even finish his sentence. The driver was a giant of a man with a scar running down his neck, holding a black umbrella that looked more like a weapon than a rain shield. He snapped the umbrella open and held it over Eleanor, ignoring Mark entirely. "Ms. Rostova," the driver said, his voice a gravelly bass. "Mr. Thorne is waiting." Mark froze. The $20 bill slipped from his fingers and fluttered into a puddle. "Thorne," Mark whispered. Elena turned to Mark one last time. Rainwater dripped from her eyelashes, but her eyes were blazing with a fire he had never seen. "Keep the 20, Mark," she said. "You're going to need every penny." She ducked into the plush, leather interior of the car. The driver slammed the door shut, sealing her away from the noise, the rain, and the man who had underestimated her for a decade. The interior of the Rolls-Royce was a sanctuary. The silence was absolute, save for the soft hum of the climate control and the rhythmic thrum of the V12 engine. The air smelled of aged cedar and expensive scotch. Sitting on the opposite bench seat was Julian Thorne. If Mark Vance was a millionaire prince of the tech world, Julian Thorne was the king of the shadowy empire that funded it. At 40, he was a venture capitalist known for ruthless efficiency and an uncanny ability to predict market crashes. He was handsome in a sharp, dangerous way, dark eyes that missed nothing, graying temples, and a suit that cost more than Mark's car. He was holding a crystal tumbler of amber liquid. He extended a second glass toward Elena. "Neat. Just how you like it," Julian said. Elena took the glass, her hands steady. She took a sip, feeling the burn of the 30-year-old single malt settle her nerves. She leaned back into the starlight headliner of the roof. "You're late," she said. "I was enjoying the show from around the corner," Julian replied, a smirk playing on his lips. "The part where he offered you bus money, cinematic. I almost intervened, but I know you prefer to handle your own trash." "He signed the IP waiver," Eleanor said, getting straight to business. Julian's expression shifted from amused to intensely serious. He tapped a tablet resting on the console between them. "I saw. My legal team just confirmed the filing. As of 4 p.m. today, the proprietary code known as Project E, the core architecture of Vance Logistics, belongs solely to Elena Rostova." "He thinks it's obsolete," Elena said, watching the rain streak the tinted windows. "He thinks the interface is the product. He doesn't understand that the routing algorithm is self-learning. It's the brain. He just kept the skull." And when the Tokyo partners realize that the upcoming 4.0 update, which Mark promised them, requires an access key that only you possess, Julian asked. "Juliany, the system will lock down," Elena said simply. "The self-preservation protocol triggers in 72 hours. Vance Logistics will be a glossy shell with no engine." Julian laughed, a genuine, hearty sound. "Remind me never to divorce you, Elle." Elena looked at him sharply. "Don't." Julian softened. He reached across the gap, his hand hovering near hers, but not touching. He respected the boundaries she had built. "I'm sorry. Too soon. But seriously, Eleanor, 10 years. Why did you wait this long? You could have crushed him a year into the marriage." Eleanor looked out the window. Through the dark tint, she saw Mark standing on the sidewalk, looking small and furious, yelling at his phone. "Because I loved him," she whispered. "Or I loved who I thought he could be. I thought if I gave him the success he wanted, he would finally be happy. He would finally see me." She turned back to Julian. "I was wrong. You don't feed a shark expecting it to become a dolphin. You just make it a bigger shark." Julian nodded. "And now?" "Now," Elena said, her voice hardening into steel. "I take back my name. I take back my work. And I'm going to build something that makes Vance Logistics look like a lemonade stand." Julian pressed a button on the intercom. "Driver, take us to the airfield. The jet is fueled." "Where are we going?" Elena asked, though she suspected the answer. "Davos," Julian said. "The Global Tech Summit starts in 2 days. You're not going as a +1 this time, Elena. You're the keynote speaker. It's time the world met the real architect." As the limo merged onto the highway, accelerating with effortless power, Elena watched the Seattle skyline recede. Somewhere in that city, Mark Vance was getting into his flashy sports car, thinking he was a free man. He didn't know that the countdown had already started. Elena took another sip of the scotch. For the first time in 10 years, the silence wasn't lonely. It was pregnant with power. "Julian," she asked. "Yes?" "Did you bring the laptop?" Julian reached under the seat and pulled out a sleek, military-grade aluminum laptop. He handed it to her, like a knight handing a sword to a queen. "Charged and connected to the satellite uplink," he said. Eleanor opened the lid. The screen glowed blue, reflecting in her eyes. A terminal window blinked, waiting for a command. "Enter passkey." Eleanor's fingers hovered over the keys. She typed a single word. "Nemesis." "Access granted." "Welcome back, architect." She smiled. "Let's go to work." The Gulfstream G650 cruised at 45,000 feet, a silent silver bullet cutting through the night sky towards Switzerland. Inside the cabin, the lighting was soft, amber-hued, designed to mimic a sunset that never ended. Elena sat in a swivel chair upholstered in cream leather. The military-grade laptop open before her. The screen cast a cool blue light on her face, reflecting in her tired eyes. But her fingers flew across the keyboard with the rhythmic precision of a concert pianist. Code lines 4050 through 8900. Recompiling. Julian sat across the aisle, reading a dossier on the Tokyo logistics market. He hadn't spoken in an hour, giving her the space she needed. That was the difference, Elena realized. Mark filled silence with noise because he was afraid of what it might say about him. Julian let silence breathe. She paused, her hands hovering over the keys. The cursor blinked next to a line of code she had written 7 years ago. Function, optimizing nodes, legacy, memory pulled her back. Not to the luxury of the jet, but to the smell of stale pizza and overheating plastic in a basement apartment in Seattle. It was 7 years ago. Mark had come home from his sales job at a shipping company, his tie loose, his face flushed with frustration. "They don't get it, Elle," he had ranted, pacing the small room that served as their living room, bedroom, and office. "The dispatchers are using whiteboards. Whiteboards! In the 21st century. If I could just show them a system that automates the routes based on traffic patterns, I could run this town." Elena had been grading math papers at the kitchen table. She looked up, her mind already whirring. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the fear of being average. She loved him then, with a fierce, protective naivety. "I can build it," she had said. Mark had laughed, not cruelly, but dismissively. "Babe, you teach algebra to high schoolers. This is complex algorithms. Traveling salesman problems. I have a master's in computational theory, Mark. You forgot?" "Yeah, but you never used it. You wanted to be a teacher." She didn't argue. That night, while he slept, she opened her old laptop. She worked for 3 weeks straight, sleeping 4 hours a night. She learned the shipping APIs. She built a neural network from scratch because the existing libraries were too slow. When she showed him the prototype, the first iteration of Project E, he stared at the screen, mouth agape. It predicts the traffic before it happens," he whispered. "It analyzes historical data and correlates it with weather patterns and local events," she explained, eyes bright with pride. "It saves 18% on fuel costs." Mark had hugged her then, lifting her off her feet. "We're going to be rich, Elle. We're going to change everything." "We." The word tasted bitter in her mouth now, at 45,000 feet. The shift had been subtle. First, it was Mark Vance, CEO of Vanlog. Then, in interviews, he stopped mentioning her. "I built the code in my garage," he told Forbes. When she confronted him, he said, "It's just branding, honey. Investors want a Steve Jobs figure. They don't understand a husband and wife team. Trust me, it's for us." Then came the galas where she was asked to stay in the background. Then the hire of the new CTO, a man who didn't understand her code, but knew how to play golf with Mark. Then the request for her to stop coming to the office entirely because she made the engineers nervous. She had let it happen. She had made herself smaller to fit into the box he built for her. "Regret is a wasted variable," Julian said softly, breaking her reverie. Eleanor looked up. He was watching her, his book closed. "I'm not regretting," Eleanor said, her voice steady. "I'm debugging." "You loved him," Julian stated. "It wasn't a question." "I loved the potential of him," she corrected. "But you can't love a man who sees you as a resource, Julian. I was just a battery he drained to power his ego. And now I'm the blackout. She hit enter. On the screen, a progress bar filled to 100%. The text flashed green. System ether, online. Legacy protocol, dormant. It's done, she said, closing the laptop. The new architecture is ready for the Davos reveal. And the old one, well, it has a ticking clock. Julian smiled, a shark-like expression that didn't reach his eyes. We land in Geneva in 2 hours. Try to sleep, Elena. You need to look like a goddess of retribution when you walk onto that stage. Elena turned her chair to the window. Below, the Atlantic Ocean was a vast, dark void. She didn't sleep. She watched the stars, waiting for the sun to rise on a new world. Tokyo was a neon fever dream. The boardroom of Yamato Heavy Industries was located on the top floor of a skyscraper in Shinjuku, a glass fortress of power. Mark Vance sat at the head of the long table, sweating through his Italian silk. This was the meeting, the one that would triple Van Log's valuation. Across from him sat Mr. Tanaka, the venerable CEO of Yamato, and his team of skeptical executives. Mr. Vance, Tanaka said, his English perfect but cold, your logistics platform has been impressive in the American market. But Tokyo is different. Our density is higher. Our margins are thinner. We require absolute precision. You promise a 20% efficiency increase with the new 4.0 update? I don't just promise it, Mr. Tanaka, Mark said, flashing his winning, practiced smile. He stood up, unbuttoning his jacket with a casual flair. I guarantee it. Van Log isn't just software. It's intuition. It thinks. He gestured to the massive screen behind him, where a live map of Tokyo's traffic grid was displayed. Little green dots represented Yamato delivery trucks. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark boomed, welcome to the future. He pressed the button on his clicker to initiate the live demo of the 4.0 update. Nothing happened. Mark pressed it again, harder. The screen remained static. The little green dots didn't move. One moment, Mark laughed nervously. Technical gremlins. You know how Wi-Fi is. He tapped his earpiece. Kevin, wake up. The slide isn't advancing. Kevin, his lead engineer back in Seattle, sounded breathless in his ear. Mark, it's not the slide. We can't get into the core. Mark froze. What do you mean you can't get in? He hissed under his breath, turning away from Tanaka. I don't know. The credentials aren't working. The system is asking for a root key. It says, license expired. License expired, Mark whispered, his blood running cold. We own the damn license. It gets worse, Kevin stammered. The routing algorithm, it stopped. The trucks in Seattle, they aren't getting new routes. They're idling, Mark. And the Japan node just went dark. Mark looked up at the screen. The map of Tokyo flickered. Then, one by one, the green dots turned red. Then, they vanished. A message box appeared in the center of the massive 8K screen, crisp and humiliatingly clear for everyone in the room to see. Critical error. Core architecture missing. Error code, div0 RCE contact. Administrator, E. Rostova. The silence in the room was deafening. Mr. Tanaka slowly took off his glasses. Mr. Vance, Tanaka said, his voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. Where are my trucks? Mark frantically tapped his phone, trying to log into the admin app. Access denied. Access denied. Access denied. It's a hack, Mark shouted, panic cracking his voice. We're under attack. My ex-wife. She's a math teacher, for God's sake. She must have hired someone. Your ex-wife, Tanaka repeated, raising an eyebrow. Elena Rostova. Mark blinked. How do you know her name? Tanaka slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a live stream from Davos, Switzerland, the Global Tech Summit. Because, Tanaka said, she is currently giving the keynote address on the main stage, and she seems to be demonstrating a system that actually works. Mark stared at the tablet. There she was, Elena, but not the mousy woman in the beige coat he had left in the rain yesterday. She was wearing a sharp crimson suit that looked like armor. Her hair was pulled back. She looked regal. She looked dangerous. And she was smiling. The auditorium in Davos was packed. 3,000 of the world's most powerful people, CEOs, world leaders, innovators, sat in the dark, their faces illuminated by the glow of the stage. Elena stood alone in the spotlight. No podium, no notes, just her, and a holographic projection floating in the air behind her. For years, Elena said, her voice amplified, clear and resonant, we have treated logistics as a brute force problem. We threw more trucks, more fuel, and more drivers at the chaos of the world. We tried to force the world to fit our schedules. She paused, scanning the crowd. Somewhere in the front row, she saw Julian watching her, a look of intense pride on his face. But the world is organic, Elena continued. It breathes. It pulses. You cannot force it. You must flow with it. She raised her hand. The hologram behind her shifted. It wasn't a map of streets. It looked like a nervous system. Glowing strands of light, pulsing with data. I present to you Ether, she said. It is not an update. It is a new organism. It doesn't just predict traffic. It predicts demand before the customer even places the order. It integrates with weather satellites, social media trends, and economic indicators to reroute supply chains in real time. The crowd murmured. This was light years ahead of anything on the market. But, Elena said, her voice dropping an octave, technology is only as good as the integrity of its code. Yesterday, a major competitor, Vanlog, suffered a catastrophic failure. A ripple of recognition went through the crowd. News of the Tokyo disaster was already trending on Twitter. That failure, Elena said, was not a bug. It was a feature of obsolescence. Their system relied on a core architecture that was, let's say, borrowed. And when the true owner reclaimed it, the shell collapsed. She didn't name Mark. She didn't have to. The implication was a sledgehammer. Ether is different, she said. Ether is built on transparency. It is built on respect for the source, and it is available today. She gestured to the screen. A live visualization of the global supply chain appeared. It was beautiful, a ballet of commerce moving in perfect harmony. My name is Elena Rostova, she said, CEO of Rostova Technologies, and I am done hiding in the background. The applause started slowly, then swelled into a roar. People stood up. It was a standing ovation, the kind usually reserved for heads of state. Elena didn't smile like a winner of a game. She smiled like a survivor of a war. As she walked off stage, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. Julian was waiting in the wings, holding a bottle of water. You were magnificent, he said, handing it to her. Did he see it? Elena asked, taking a long drink. Mark? Julian checked his phone. Oh, he saw it. The stock price of Vanlog has dropped 40% in the last hour. The board has called an emergency meeting. Tanaka walked away from the deal. Mark is currently on a flight to Zurich. Elena froze. Here? He's coming here? He's desperate, Julian said. He thinks he can talk you down. He thinks he can charm you back into fixing it. He doesn't realize the bridge isn't just burned, Elena. You nuked the canyon. Elena straightened her jacket. The fear she expected to feel wasn't there. Instead, she felt a cold curiosity. Let him come, she said. He needs to see what he threw away. Not on a screen. in person. He'll be here by evening, Julian warned. Security is tight, but he has a press pass. He'll try to make a scene. Good, Elena said, walking toward the exit, where the paparazzi were already gathering. I have one more lesson to teach him. What's that? That the starter wife just finished him. The after-party at the Belvedere Hotel was the kind of event where the champagne was older than the guests and the air was thick with the scent of money. Outside, the Swiss Alps stood like silent sentinels against the night sky, their peaks dusted with snow. Inside, the warmth was suffocating. Elena moved through the crowd with a grace she hadn't possessed 48 hours ago. She wore a gown of midnight blue velvet that hugged her frame, a stark contrast to the drab cardigans Mark had preferred. Julian walked beside her, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, not to guide her, but to anchor her. They're all looking at you, Julian murmured, leaning close. They're looking at the stock ticker, Elena corrected, nodding toward the discreet screens mounted on the mahogany walls. Vanlog was in free fall. Rostova Technologies was vertical. Same thing, Julian grinned. The heavy oak doors at the entrance of the ballroom swung open with a violence that silenced the string quartet. Mark Vance stood in the doorway. He looked like a ghost of the man who had sat in the law firm yesterday. His suit was rumpled, his tie missing, his top button undone. His hair, usually gelled into submission, was wild. Sweat glistened on his forehead, despite the alpine chill. He held a press pass in a shaking hand, waving it at the bewildered doorman. "I'm on the list," Mark shouted, his voice cracking. "I'm a keynote speaker. Ask anyone." The room went dead silent. 300 heads turned. Security guards, large men in discreet suits, moved to intercept him. Mark shoved one of them, a futile, desperate gesture. "Get off me! I need to talk to my wife, Elena." He spotted her across the room. His eyes locked onto hers, wide and manic. "Elena!" he screamed, stumbling past a waiter and sending a tray of crystal flutes crashing to the floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Julian stepped forward, his body turning into a shield. "I'll handle this," he whispered to Eleanor, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. Eleanor placed a hand on Julian's chest. "No," she said softly. "He came for me." She stepped out from behind Julian. She didn't walk toward Mark. She simply stood her ground. The crowd parted, creating a wide aisle between the fallen king and the rising queen. Mark stopped 10 feet away from her. He was panting. He looked at her dress, her hair, the diamonds at her throat. He looked at Julian, standing protectively behind her. "You," Mark breathed, pointing a trembling finger. "You did this. You ruined me." "I didn't do anything, Mark," Elena said. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the silence, it carried to every corner of the room. "I simply took back what was mine." "Yours?" Mark laughed, a high, hysterical sound. "You were a math tutor. You were a nobody. I built that company. I sold the vision." I shook the hands. "And who wrote the code, Mark?" Eleanor asked calmly. "Who stayed up for 3 years straight while you were networking at golf clubs? Who patched the servers on Christmas Eve while you were asleep?" "That doesn't matter," Mark yelled, stepping closer. The security guards tensed, but Eleanor held up a hand to stay them. "It was our marriage. Everything we had was community property. You stole my intellectual property." "I signed the divorce papers you drafted, Mark," Elena said, her voice cutting like a scalpel. Page 42, paragraph 3. "All intellectual property created prior to incorporation is the sole property of the originator." You were so eager to keep the house and the yacht, you didn't even read what you were giving away. You thought my code was old furniture, you could leave on the curb. Mark's face turned a deep, mottled red. He realized, with dawning horror, that the audience wasn't sympathetic. They were judging him. These were the titans of industry, and they were looking at him not as a victim, but as a fool who hadn't done his due diligence. Elena, Mark's voice shifted, dropping the aggression. Trying to find the charm that had worked for a decade, he took a step forward, hands out, palms up. Baby, look. We're tired. We're emotional. Let's go upstairs. Let's talk about this privately. We can fix this. We're a team, remember? You and me against the world. It was the same line he had used when he convinced her to quit her job. The same line he used when he forgot her birthday. The same line he used when she found lipstick on his collar. Elena looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't see the man she loved. She saw a stranger, a small, scared stranger. There is no us, Mark, she said, and there is no team. There is just you, standing in the wreckage of your own ego. Don't walk away from me, Mark lunged. Julian moved faster than thought. He caught Mark's wrist in midair, twisting it behind his back with practiced ease. Mark yelped, forced to his knees on the plush carpet. That's enough, Julian said, his voice like grinding stones. Mr. Vance is leaving. Ensure he doesn't return. The security guards hauled Mark to his feet. As they dragged him backward toward the doors, he didn't look at Julian. He kept his eyes on Eleanor. You're nothing without me, he screamed, the words echoing off the vaulted ceiling. You'll fail. You need me. The doors slammed shut. The silence returned. Elena didn't flinch. She turned to the room, picked up a fresh glass of champagne from a passing waiter, and raised it. My apologies for the interruption, she said coolly. Now, about that supply chain integration. The room erupted in polite, impressed applause. But inside, Elena's hands were trembling. An hour later, Elena escaped the party. She needed air. She found a balcony overlooking the valley, the cold wind biting at her exposed skin. It felt grounding. She heard the door open behind her. She expected Julian. I bribed a waiter 50 grand to let me up here. It was Mark. He was standing in the shadows of the balcony door. He had cleaned himself up slightly, tucked in his shirt, fixed his hair, but his eyes were hollow. He looked deflated, like a balloon that had lost its air. Elena didn't turn around. She kept looking at the mountains. You're violating the restraining order Julian's lawyers just filed. I don't care, Mark said. He sounded exhausted. He walked to the railing, standing a few feet away from her. He didn't look at her. He looked out at the darkness. Isabel left me, he said. That was fast, Elena replied, no emotion in her voice. She saw the stock ticker. Said she didn't sign up for a bankrupt husband. Mark let out a dry chuckle. You were right, about everything. I know. Mark turned to her. Elena, please. I'm not asking for me. The company. There are 600 employees. Families. If the stock hits zero, they lose everything. The pension fund, the benefits, it's all tied to the valuation. He was playing the guilt card. It was his favorite weapon. He knew Elena's weakness was her empathy. I know about the employees, Mark, Elena said, finally turning to face him. That's why Rostova Technologies sent offer letters to your engineering and support staff this morning, at 20% above their current salary. Most of them have already accepted. Mark's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He slumped against the railing. You really thought of everything, he whispered. I had 10 years to think, Mark. While you were out being a visionary, I was at home thinking about every variable, every contingency. Mark looked at her, tears forming in his eyes. Why? Why destroy me like this? Was I that bad of a husband? I gave you a house in Medina. I gave you a life most women dream of. You gave me a cage, Elena said, her voice shaking for the first time. You took my work, you put your name on it, and you convinced me I wasn't good enough to own it. You made me invisible, Mark. And the worst part? I let you. Because I thought that's what love was. Sacrifice. She stepped closer to him, her eyes hard as diamonds. But love isn't erasing yourself for someone else. That's theft. You stole my life. I just took it back. Mark reached into his jacket pocket. For a second, Elena tensed, but he pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the divorce decree. I can rip this up, he said, his voice desperate. We can void it. We can say it was a mistake. You can come back as co-CEO. 50-50 partners. Real partners this time. Elena, please. I can't do this without you. I don't know how the code works. I don't know how to run the back end. I'm a fraud. It was the truth. Finally, the naked, ugly truth he had been hiding from the world. Eleanor looked at the paper. Then she looked at Mark. She saw the fear in him, the terrifying realization that he was mediocre. No, Mark, she said softly. I don't want to be your partner, and I don't want to be your wife. Then what do you want? He cried. What do you want from me? Nothing, Eleanor said. I want absolutely nothing from you. Not your money, not your company, not your apology. She walked past him toward the door. I just want you to remember, she said, pausing at the threshold. Every time you see a Rostova truck, every time you read about Ether in the news, every time you look in the mirror, remember that you had it all, and you traded it for a trophy that didn't love you and a title you didn't earn. She opened the door. Goodbye, Mark. She walked out, leaving him alone in the cold. 6 months later, the new headquarters of Rostova Technologies was not a glass skyscraper. It was a converted industrial warehouse in the arts district of Seattle. It was open, filled with natural light, plants, and the hum of collaboration. There were no corner offices. Elena sat at a desk in the middle of the floor, surrounded by her team, many of whom were former Vanlog engineers who looked happier than they had in years. The massive screen on the wall displayed the global metrics for Ether. It was now the standard operating system for 60% of global shipping. The efficiency gains had reduced global carbon emissions by 4% in just half a year. Elena typed a final command and closed her laptop. It was 6 p.m. Time to go home. She walked out to the parking lot. The rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp and clean. A black Audi pulled up. Not a limo, just a nice car. Julian rolled down the window. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore a cashmere sweater and jeans. He looked younger, more relaxed. Ready? He asked. Ready, Elena smiled, getting into the passenger seat. How was the board meeting? Boring, Elena laughed. They want to acquire Vanlog. Julian raised an eyebrow. Oh, and what did the CEO say? I said no, Elena said, buckling her seatbelt. Why buy a sinking ship when we already have the crew? Vanlog had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy 2 weeks ago. Mark Vance had been ousted by his own board. The last Elena heard, he was living in a rental in Bellevue, trying to launch a crypto startup that no one was investing in. Good call, Julian said. He pulled out of the lot. By the way, that little house you were looking at? The one with the garden in Queen Anne? Yeah? The seller accepted the offer. Elena felt a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't a mansion. It was a cozy, erratic Victorian house with a wild garden and a view of the Sound. It was hers, bought with her money, in her name. Julian, she said. Yeah? Thank you. For the lift. That day, Julian reached over and squeezed her hand. This time, he didn't let go, and neither did she. "Any time, partner," he said. They drove off toward the city, blending into the traffic. No motorcade, no fanfare, just two people building a life. Elena looked in the side mirror. The reflection showed a woman she finally recognized. She wasn't Elena Vance, the starter wife. She wasn't even just Elena Rostova, the CEO. She was free. Montage of the story's key moments. The signing of the papers, the limo in the rain, the stage in Davos, and finally, Elena smiling in her new office. Elena didn't just win a divorce settlement, she won her life back. She proved that true power isn't about who shouts the loudest, it's about who holds the keys. Mark Vance learned the hard way that when you underestimate a woman who helped you build your throne, you shouldn't be surprised when she kicks the legs out from under it. This story reminds us that your worth is never defined by who you are married to, but by what you are capable of. What did you think of Elena's revenge? Was it too harsh? Or did Mark get exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. Until next time, keep your head high and your standards higher.